welcome to podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. I would like to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon. Your contributions help to make the show sustainable. When you're ready to launch your next project, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so you should check out Linode at www.podcastinit.com/Linode and get a $20 credit to try out their fast and reliable Linux virtual servers for running your next app. Do you need to learn more about how to scale your apps or learn new techniques for building them? Pluralsight has the training and mentoring you need to level up your skills. Go to www.podcastinit.com/pluralsight to start your free trial today. You can visit the site to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, read the show notes, get in touch, and support the show. To help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes or Google Play Music, tell your friends and coworkers, and share it on social media. If you work with data for your job or want to learn more about how open source is powering the latest innovations in data science, then make your way to the Open Data Science Conference, happening in London in October and San Francisco in November. Follow the links in the show notes to register. Your host as usual is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Jacob Tomlinson about opsdroid. So Jacob, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, so my name's Jacob Tomlinson. My background is in web development, web design, and then more recently kind of Linux system administration and cloud architecture.
And how did you find yourself making the transition into systems administration from doing more web-oriented work?
So I spent only about a year doing kind of web development full time, and I was writing PHP applications with MySQL databases and things, and I just kept finding myself enjoying building the servers and getting all the software installed more than actually building the websites. And so after a little while, I decided that I thought that I prefer to transition into doing just the server stuff more. So I started looking for positions in that.
Yeah, and with the recent movement of DevOps, the actual administration of the systems is becoming more of a software engineering discipline in and of itself anyway, so it's definitely a lot of interesting challenges to tackle in that regard as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I found myself quite, the people that I was working with in the system administration side, a lot of them had come from either Microsoft system administration or kind of straight into system administration from a more pure computer science point of view. So me coming from a web development background was quite useful because I kind of understood the developer side of it more than the kind of operations side, and that was really useful to kind of communicate between the different areas.
And you said that when you were doing the web work, you were primarily working in PHP. So do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Yeah, Python's a funny one for me. I feel like I've learned Python probably about 4 times maybe. The first time was at school, kind of it was the standard thing that people were suggesting to learn. It was before Python was added to the kind of actual curriculum here in England. But it was one of those things, I learned it a little bit as I was getting into kind of computers in general. But then I didn't really do much with it for a couple of years. And then when I was further on in education, we had one module in one of our courses which was Python, so kind of that was nice to revisit and have a look at Python again. Although frustratingly, from then on, they switched us onto Visual Basic, which wasn't necessarily ideal for what I was looking at doing. So it kind of, when we moved to Visual Basic, I started looking at PHP because I was more interested in kind of web backend stuff, and that seemed to be the language of choice then. And it wasn't until I kind of got more into the system administration stuff and saw that Python was really useful for sysadmin work that I kind of sat down and thought, right, I'm going to properly learn Python now and really get to grips with it. So I kind of went through a big phase of relearning, and now these days it seems to be the language I use more than anything.
And are you using it primarily for writing one-off scripts or general tooling, or are you also using it in the context of one of the configuration management frameworks?
So it's mainly in kind of one-off scripts and tooling. Weirdly, a lot of the configuration management I've done is in Puppet, so that, Ruby world. But my Ruby's not as anywhere near as polished as my Python. But I tend to find myself writing a lot of Python for kind of administering thing on Amazon Web Services and using different APIs, controlling Kubernetes clusters with that API and those kind of tasks. I also find myself, whenever I need to write like a little RESTful API to do this, that, or the other, I end up just writing that in Python with something like Flask or Django.
So I'm wondering if you can briefly describe what opsdroid is and the problem that you were trying to solve when you first started the project.
Yeah, so opsdroid's kind of grown out of partly just an obsession with chatbots. I guess I got really interested just after watching the first Iron Man film when that came out, and Jarvis. And I think that's, if you talk to a lot of people that are quite into chatbots, that seems to be one of the main examples that they say. And I was always quite interested in writing something along those lines. And kind of within the team that I work in now, we wanted some ways of automating different workloads and things. And I was spending a lot of time reading about the way that GitHub works internally, and saw that they were using what they called to be ChatOps, and they were using Hubot, was the framework that they've written in CoffeeScript for kind of automating a lot of their workflows. We used that for a little while, but I found myself getting a bit frustrated with it, and so I decided that I'd have a go at writing my own framework to try and solve that same kind of problem. I primarily chose to do it in Python because there was a specific library that I wanted to learn, which is the new async IO stuff that came out in Python 3.4 and kind of polished in Python 3.5. And so I saw it as a really good opportunity to really get stuck in with that library, because it was quite useful in the context of what opsdroid does. So the idea behind the module is it's meant to just be like a glue between other services that can kind of link up natural language with actually running some Python code to do a thing. So the idea of opsdroid is you run it on a server somewhere, you install some modules for your chat clients, whether that's Slack or Facebook Messenger or Twitter or however you want to interact with it. You have some modules for storing stuff in databases. So if you need the bot to be able to remember anything or kind of persisting state of a conversation, then that will get stored in different databases. And then there's modules that I've called skills in the framework, which are just different Python functions that can do a specific thing. So whether that's starting servers or stopping servers, or checking the status of a pull request on GitHub, or just injecting memes and other funny things into the conversation, opsdroid is kind of the process that sits in the middle and like brokers all the different services that it needs in order to make that happen.
And you mentioned that when you first started working with ChatOps in general, you were trying out Hubot from GitHub, and you mentioned that you were starting to get frustrated with that. So I'm wondering, what were some of the frustrations that you were seeing? And I'm also wondering if you looked at any of the other bot frameworks before you decided to implement opsdroid, such as Airbot or Alita.
Yeah, so some of the frustrations I was having with Hubot was partly around the language. So Hubot's written in CoffeeScript, which some people seem to like CoffeeScript, some people seem to really hate it. I'm kind of on the fence personally about it. But one of the things we found from that is because CoffeeScript is like it's a derivative of JavaScript, and you have to almost like compile it into JavaScript in order to get it to run. You can write skills for Hubot in either CoffeeScript or JavaScript. And it meant that there's quite a big fragmentation in the documentation around different projects. And if you have a look around on GitHub for all sorts of things people have written, some things will be written in CoffeeScript, some things will be written in JavaScript. The documentation is a bit split on I think GitHub try and push you towards the CoffeeScript side of things. But I found debugging quite tricky because of that. Some of the other things that we were finding with it was just actually installing it was fine, but installing additional libraries, it required you to either dump files in a directory or push stuff into npm. And again, that's fine, but because I work primarily in Python, I was just finding it a bit frustrating having to switch out to a different language to do all those different things in. And then one of the last things that I found frustrating was the fact that you can only hook up Hubot to one chat service at a time. If you want to hook it up to multiple chat services, you have to run multiple instances of Hubot with kind of duplicated configurations and skills and things. And so I was primarily using Slack to interact with the bot, but there were a few situations where it's like, well, I wanted to hook it up to some other clients and maybe hook it up to Twitter as well to control a Twitter account or something along those lines. And I was interested to see if I could write something that could do all of those in one go. The other kind of thing that I was finding frustrated was the kind of limitations on how you could match the language to a skill. So Hubot is all about regular expressions and matching regular expressions to different skills. And although opsdroid does that, opsdroid's got a whole suite of other ways of matching different things. And kind of getting Hubot to do anything other than regular expressions was just it felt a bit hacky. So I started having a look around for an alternative, and I did come across some of the frameworks like Airbot, Alita. I kind of It's not a great reason, but I just dismissed Lita because it was in Ruby, and I preferred to work with something that was in a language that I knew quite well already. So I was kind of considering Python or JavaScript frameworks. My PHP days are kind of behind me. I'd rather not dip too much back into that. So I did have a look at Urbot, and there were a couple of others that I considered that I can't remember the name of now. But Urbot felt very much like, it was almost like a command line within a chat client. So it was very much about, you start a command with an exclamation mark and then a short command word, and then some arguments. And although I prefer to use the terminal over GUIs often, I didn't think it would be an easy sell to the rest of my team and my coworkers to kind of say, oh, you now have to use the command line to do this, but you have to use it in a chat client where you don't get any auto-completion or anything along those lines. So again, I was interested in this async.io library, and I thought this was an interesting project, and so I thought I'll have a go at writing my own.
And what is it about the problem domain that you think lends itself well to using async.io and just asynchrony in general?
So I find that every kind of interaction that you're going to have with a bot is going to be an event-driven thing. You're going to have events coming in from different places. It's either going to be coming in from your chat client, it's going to be coming in from a third-party API service. Opsdroid can also do kind of cron jobs and those kind of things. So these are kind of treated as events coming in from a different place. And so you want these things to happen concurrently and kind of running on an event loop and things. And I've been looking at libraries like Tornado and stuff like that, but it was actually the Home Assistant project had just switched out their core from kind of using the standard Python threading libraries to using async.io, and I just got really interested in that library and thought, oh, that's their application is also very event driven, and so I thought, oh, that library sounds like it lends itself really well to this problem.
And before we go too much further, I'd like to take a bit of a diversion and just have you define how you think of the term ChatOps and why you think it's a valuable approach to doing development and systems administration.
Yeah, sure. So I found a definition that I quite liked for ChatOps that I ended up putting at the top of the README on the project. And the definition kind of covers using a chat client to do operational work that you very often within a team of administrators, you do on your own. You don't necessarily share that with people. There's very often, like, if something goes wrong and you need to fix it, it's a very insular kind of task that you have to do. You do it on your own. You do it quietly. You might document it. You might not document it. You might write some scripts to do it, and you might share those scripts with your team, but you also might not. So the idea of ChatOps is moving all of that stuff out of kind of your own personal workspace into somewhere that's like a group location. So doing these kind of operations within a group chat within some kind of messaging client, it means that everybody else in the team has visibility over what you've done. They can see what's happening. If there's some kind of large incident happening and multiple people are trying to solve a problem, you can kind of work together within the chat client to do that. And it also means you've got like a record of what's happened. So if something's happened in the middle of the night and somebody's on call and they've resolved the issue, the rest of the team can come in the morning and then go back through the chat log and see what's happened, see what alerts are fired and what's been done to try and resolve those problems.
Yeah, I definitely think that the shared context when there is an incident that you're trying to resolve is probably one of the more powerful aspects of ChatOps because, like you said, it does bring more visibility and you don't have to have that additional synchronization point of people asking, oh, what commands are you running or what's the state of the system? They can just look at the chat log and automatically understand what's happening, what's going on, and where the current state of resolution happens to be without having to maintain an additional communication channel that's going to bring you out of the flow of trying to actually solve the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So it's also, I find it quite a nice place to consolidate a lot of different resources. So, it's all too easy to have cron jobs that kind of do different bits of housekeeping or that kind of thing. And they can quite easily, once you've got a setup of lots of servers, if you're not strict with how you set things up, you can end up with all sorts of cron jobs under all sorts of different users running all over the place. Whereas having it in kind of a ChatOps context in a bot like opsdroid, it's all contained in one place and everybody can see that and they can see when they're running and see exactly what's going on. And the other thing is all of the scripts that you've got for automating all the workflows, again, they all are kept together. So whether you're writing, actual Python scripts to do these things within opsdroid, or whether you're getting opsdroid to shell out to Ansible or Puppet or some other application for applying different configs, you're still collecting all these together and keeping it all in a big bundle. So everybody has visibility over the capabilities and also what's being done.
And You touched briefly there on one of the things that I wanted to discuss as well, which is integrating ChatOps with an existing configuration management solution. So I'm wondering if you can just talk about how opsdroid can be used in conjunction with things like Ansible or Puppet or SaltStack.
Sure. So I've tried to keep the idea behind writing skills for opsdroid really, really simple. Like an individual skill for opsdroid is a Python function. You use decorators to match those functions up to the actual language that's being used in the chat client, but it is just a function of pure Python. And so that can do whatever you like. So, if you want to call out to a service like Ansible, you can just literally, use the subprocess and open a new process and get that to run, and then maybe report the status of that command back into the chat client. Or you might want to, if something you're using for configuration has an API, like a RESTful API, then you can, of course, use all the Python tooling for interacting with an API and kind of making logical decisions about, oh, this has happened, so should I run this or should I run this? But all the time it can be done in a dialogue with the bot, and kind of you can have a back and forth about what should be done in different situations if there's no kind of sensible default set or anything like that. So it doesn't necessarily give you tons of help with exactly how you should do something, but it just gives you the freedom and the flexibility to work with whatever you're happy with.
And one of the other aspects of ChatOps that you brought up is the idea of accessibility across the team, particularly given the fact that, as you said, a number of the other bot frameworks require learning a particular syntax for being able to interact with the service. But you mentioned that you wanted to allow for a more natural language style interaction. And I also noticed in the documentation that you brought that accessibility idea and aesthetic to the problem of installation as well, which I know is one of the problems that I've run into with some of the other frameworks. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about why that's such an important aspect of the project and what you did to enable that ease of installation and maintenance.
Yeah, sure. So I really wanted it to be simple in terms of I wanted you to be able to just install opsdroid in kind of one go without having to worry about too many dependencies and things. And it's been a little bit tricky because of the decision that I made to go with the async.io library, because that and also the way I used it, because I basically set a requirement for Python 3.5 or Python 3.6. So that's kind of, you have to have one of those on your system to use opsdroid. So that can make things a little bit tricky. If you look at the documentation, it just recommends that you use a pip3 install opsdroid, and that will just put opsdroid on your system, and it'll also give you a shell command, literally just opsdroid, that you can run. And the way that you configure opsdroid, which seems to differ from other libraries, is there's just a single configuration file. And in there, it's a YAML file, and you list all the different modules that you want, all the different configuration options that you want. Opsdroid will try and give you like a sensible default when you first install it. So to get started, it's literally 2 commands. You just install opsdroid and run opsdroid, and it will give you like a basic bot. But then you can go into that YAML file and you can just edit it and say, I want to use Slack. Here's my Slack API key. I want to install these skills. And it's quite straightforward in that sense. And also with installing the modules as well. So as I said, there's 3 types of modules. They're all treated as Python modules. They're all like imported. When you write them, you can either write them as an individual file or as a directory with an underscore in it, underscore in there. And so it should feel quite natural to people that are used to writing Python. But when you configure things up, you have a list in the YAML file of the different modules that you want. And one of the key value pairs that you have to have in each thing is just a name. And that name, if you don't give it any more information than that, it assumes that there is a module that already exists with that name in the opsdroid repository on GitHub. And so it immediately goes away, pulls down that repository, and installs it into a virtual env for you to then for opsdroid to import into the project. So to get going, if you just want to use off-the-shelf libraries, you literally just specify a list of names and it will install those modules, and then you can get going. But then if you want to create your own skills, you give it a name, but then you also either give it a path to your module or a Git URL to either GitHub or locally, and it will then move everything around and get it into the right place for you. But I kind of wanted to just keep it really, really simple for onboarding people. I just wanted people to just run 2 commands and then they're away.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that because, as I said, some of the other frameworks that I've looked at implementing, the install process is a lot more involved. It requires setting up a full server with associated configuration of the instance and the service and writing code to be able to actually get everything connected. So being able to just pip install, drop a config file, and have something working is definitely a much cleaner interface and much lower requirement for being able to get up and started. So I think it's definitely much more likely to drive adoption of the framework in general. So what's been the most interesting and most challenging aspect of implementing opsdroid in the process of trying to get it up and running and get it distributable?
So I think some of the challenges I found is around kind of making it as flexible as possible. The more flexible you make something, then the more of a kind of management and development overhead that you end up with. And I've always wanted this framework to literally just be glue between any services that apply, that are applicable to this problem. I just want somebody, either myself or a third party contributor, to just come in and add that capability to opsdroid. So some of the interesting things that I've been trying to tackle is how to connect other kind of natural language understanding services up to opsdroid. So out of the box, you get some standard stuff like matching against regular expressions or triggering events off a cron job, or you can also have webhooks as well. So opsdroid will expose a RESTful API, and you can, if you hit a certain endpoint, it will call a skill in the same way that you saying something to it in a messaging window will. But I've also hooked up. Just initially, I've hooked up API AI, which is an API for doing kind of intent matching and natural language understanding. It gives you a lot more over regular expressions. You go into API AI, you create an account, and then you create an intent. So your intent will be, something that you want to happen. Restart a server. Restart server name here. You give it some examples of different kind of permutations of that sentence. So like, restart the server, could you please restart this box? I want to restart this server, a few different things. And then they use some kind of statistical matching to kind of fill in all the blanks. So if a user says something which is pretty close to that, but not exactly what you've said, it will give you like an accuracy score. It will say, I'm 90% sure that this sentence matches to this intent. And then you can configure opsdroid and say, if it's more than 70% sure, then run it. And so hooking up to that service has been really interesting, and I've definitely got some plans in the roadmap to hook up to other services like Lewis and Lex and some of the other kind of natural language understanding APIs that exist. But they all have slightly different ideas around how to handle context. So, how to manage when if a bot asks a user like a yes or no question, and the user will just say yes or no, and so the bot will receive that yes or no out of context, and it has to try and figure out kind of what's happened previously to understand what is going on with that. And that's quite a big area of research, it seems, within different bot frameworks. So actually allowing opsdroid to handle context, but also fit in with these different services that all are trying to apply context differently. It's quite a tricky challenge, and I definitely haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet, but it's something that I'm really interested in working on in the next few months.
I also imagine that the fact that the entire core of the framework is asynchronous and you may be receiving interaction from multiple different sources simultaneously drastically confounds the problem of trying to maintain that context, because it's not as simple as saying, okay, what was the last command that I received? That's my context. You have to be able to associate the particular channel that it's coming from and the last potentially series of messages, maybe match it up to a particular user that their last command was from to be able to match up that context.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of got to maintain kind of sessions, and kind of got to make decisions about like, well, if I have maybe a 10 or 20 message exchange with the bot, and then I go away for 40 minutes and I come back and continue to talk to the bot, is that a new session, or is that kind of moving on to a new conversation? And the bot's got to make some decisions about how it honors different bits of context and how it hangs on or releases different bits of information.
And in the context, too, of session management, one of the issues, particularly when you're talking about ChatOps in general, is the idea of security. So I'm wondering if you have any mechanisms in place, or at least some plans for implementing an authorization and authentication capability so that you can ensure that you don't have some bad actor or somebody who's not authorized to perform a certain command, either purposefully or accidentally running modifications to your production system via the chatbot?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting challenge. I think in opsdroid, I'm trying to take the approach of handing that responsibility off, if I can, onto another service. So whether that's the chat service itself or some kind of other way of dealing with it. But because opsdroid is so flexible, it perfectly allows you to install opsdroid, install a skill that allows you to stop and start production instances on Amazon, and then hook that straight up to Twitter and let people on the internet just do whatever they want to your infrastructure. Like, you have the power to configure it badly and end up in a situation where you're kind of leaking different bits of permissions. And kind of going back to something I was talking about before to do with connecting to multiple services, like, it's one of the things that I was initially interested in with opsdroid is being able to connect to multiple services. So can we have a bot sitting in our Slack for internal use, and then can we have a bot hooked up to Twitter to kind of manage our Twitter account and auto respond and kind of do some interesting stuff on Twitter. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how I would handle the permissions between, we want people in the Slack channel to be able to run certain skills, but we don't want the people through the Twitter channel to be able to run them if it's to do with infrastructure. And I feel like I haven't decided well enough how to implement that and how to keep it really, really secure. And so I haven't crossed that line yet. So it's still just kind of a free for all at the moment. It's definitely on the roadmap in the future for kind of adding some kind of role-based access control or something along those lines. But I want to federate the authentication out to other services. So whether that, you have a set of skills which are for rebooting production instances, and you have some skills that can reboot development instances, and maybe those skills will only apply in specific channels on Slack, and then it's kind of the onus is on whoever is managing the Slack account to make sure that people only authenticated people can be in different channels, and only the right people have access to the right services through that. Because all the skills in opsdroid are really flexible and you can write them however you like, you can install the same skill over and over with different config options. So you might have a skill for rebooting different instances, and the config for that might have API keys that can only access development instances, and another skill might have API keys that can only access production instances. And then you can lock those skills down into the specific channels that you want. So you might have different levels of permission kind of lined up with different groups within your chat client. But I still need to think about how that would really work on the back end, and how you could be really certain that your permissions wouldn't leak across between the two, or that there weren't any bugs that would allow people to escalate. There's no such thing as a perfect bug-free secure piece of software, but I think that's an area where I need to work on the maturity of the project and really get that up to speed. So in terms of the way we use it at the moment, we just make the assumption that the bot can do a certain number of things. We're quite, when we give the bot API keys to do things, we make sure that those keys can only do the things that we want the bot to be able to do. So if it's rebooting an instance, it can only reboot an instance. It can't also launch instances, just in case somebody manages to get those keys out in any way. But then we just make the assumption that anybody that can access the Slack channel that the bot is in can do these things. And if we want to hook the bot up to Twitter, at the moment I'm using a separate deployment of opsdroid to hook up to that, so that it's not got those skills available or those keys available. But that kind of goes against the principle of what I was trying to achieve initially. So it's definitely something I want to work on more.
Yeah, as you describe the problem domain and the sort of capabilities-based permissions, it puts me in mind of an interview that I did a few weeks ago with the author of a framework called Yosai. So I don't know if that might be worth taking a look at as you continue to think about the security capabilities of the system.
Yeah, definitely. I'm halfway through listening to that episode, actually, so I shall continue.
So in addition to permissions management and access control to the different systems, I'm wondering what are some of the other security implications that users should be aware of when they're deploying a bot for interfacing with their production environments and the other third-party services that they might have subscriptions with or want to be able to interact with from a chat framework?
I guess a lot of it is just around making sure that whatever permissions that you allow the bot to have, you're comfortable that anybody that can speak to the bot should have those permissions, and making sure that, if there's a chance that you're going to be billed for different things the bot's going to do, that maybe there's some kind of throttling or some kind of limiting within the skill. So I guess a lot of the responsibility for ensuring that skills are secure are down to the users. For if you want to write your own skills for opsdroid, kind of opsdroid will give you a certain amount of help within the framework, but it's down to you to write skills that are secure. And so it's one of those things that maybe it would be a good idea to have put out some guidance on and some kind of assistance with, but it's something that's also slightly out of my control. So it's just trying to ensure people are using best practices.
And as I was preparing for this interview, one of the other questions that came to mind is, what do you see as the sort of dividing line between a chat-oriented, primarily text interface bot framework, and those that are created for voice interactions such as Mycroft or Calliope or the Amazon or Google virtual assistant tools? And wondering if you see any potential synchronization or integration points between those two different classes of sort of automation.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting kind of thing to think about, because there's just been an explosion of different chat frameworks, both for the text-based chat and voice chat over the last few years. Amazon have kind of led the charge with opening different things up to developers and allowing developers to write skills for Alexa. And a lot of people are now following suit and writing different third-party libraries. So one of the things, if you have a look at the opsdroid project, there is a project that I worked on. It was literally just for a weekend. I was just curious to see if I could add it, which was adding voice capabilities to opsdroid. So the idea was just that you'd install opsdroid and also this project opsdroid audio. You just put them on a Raspberry Pi with a microphone, and it uses the Snowboy hot word detector. So it's a nice open source Python extension, which it just uses the microphone to listen for a specific word, and when it hears that word, it then calls another function. So I then wrap that up to call out to opsdroid. So as well as being able to hook up to Slack and different services like that, opsdroid can just expose a WebSocket API, and then you can write your own chat client to connect to opsdroid. So I was exploring with opsdroid audio how to do that, and it felt very similar in the way that I was interacting with that bot through speaking to it as I would through the chat client. But I guess one thing that's kind of you think about a lot more in text-based bots is multi-user. Especially within a single conversation. So the majority of the time when speaking to the bot, I'm in like a group chat where there's multiple people in my team, kind of all in that same room, and we might be having a conversation with it where like I'll say a thing and the bot will respond, and then somebody else will say a thing and the bot will respond to that. And there's a lot of kind of thinking about how to handle the context between that. And how to, does the context of one user apply to the other user if you're having like a multi-way conversation? And I don't think some of the kind of audio frameworks like Alexa are thinking about that. I know that Microsoft have got an API for picking out different voices within an audio stream, and they're providing that as a service through Azure. So people are obviously thinking about these things, but I think that's a big difference. Is I found it also from using services like API AI and things like that. It assumes that the bot has to respond to everything always, because it's assuming that you're having a one-to-one conversation. If I ask Alexa to do something, it would be bad if Alexa just ignored me and didn't respond. If it didn't think that was applicable, it would probably come back and say something like, I don't know what you mean, or what do you want me to do, or here's some suggestions of different things that I can do. Whereas when you've got a bot in like a multi-user room, you don't want the bot to be responding to everything everybody is saying. If I'm having a conversation with a colleague, I want the bot to kind of stay out of that conversation unless something is said that is relevant to the bot. Then you want the bot to chip in, and that's definitely a tricky problem, and it's definitely not polished. Our bot definitely interrupts us with all sorts of random stuff occasionally, which can get frustrating. But it's a totally different paradigm to kind of a one-to-one conversation with a device like an Echo.
And also, particularly given the fact that you mentioned Home Assistant earlier in the conversation, I'm curious, one, why you didn't decide to just try and implement opsdroid on top of the existing async IO loop that Home Assistant uses, and alternately, wondering if you have considered using some sort of bridge to be able to integrate opsdroid with Home Assistant so that you can have a text interface to the broader home automation capabilities that Home Assistant brings along.
Yeah, definitely. I did consider it initially as kind of writing it as an extension to Home Assistant. I think Home Assistant has to be one of my favorite open source projects. It's got a really nice community and it's a really well written application. But I think one of the kind of deciding factors in making opsdroid a separate thing was around the target audience that I had for this. So, I wanted sysadmins and DevOps engineers to be installing opsdroid and using it within their workflow. And I felt like saying to them, oh, by the way, you have to install this home automation framework first, because, you look at Home Assistant and you immediately think, oh, that's really cool. It can turn my lights off and do all sorts of automatic things. But you wouldn't necessarily make the leap to it being useful in system administration, although I've definitely seen examples of people using it that way. So I thought, I'll make opsdroid a separate thing, but I would really like to tie in some integration between the two at some point. I have been thinking more recently about writing a skill that kind of looks up all the available devices within Home Assistant and then adds a load of intents around switch off the light, switch on the light, all those kind of things. But also Home Assistant, have been adding lots of voice control things to their framework recently. The last couple of releases have included a new intents component, and their stuff is very aimed at hooking in with the Google Home or the Alexa ecosystem. But it's really interesting to see how they're developing that. And so I've decided for the time being that I'm just going to hold off until what they're working on matures a little bit, and then sit down and figure out how to really well integrate opsdroid into the Home Assistant ecosystem. Because I would really like to be able to just grab my phone and open up Facebook Messenger and talk to my Home Assistant machine and turn off different lights, especially when I'm not inside my property, because I'm still a little bit cautious about actually exposing my Home Assistant to the internet. I don't really want people to be able to log into my Home Assistant and see the status of things. Whereas if I can use a chat client that only, that's Facebook or authenticating or somebody like that, then I feel a bit more comfortable about interacting with my home setup over that way.
And what are some of the other features or capabilities that you have planned for the future of opsdroid?
So kind of to recover what I was talking about before is adding extra natural language understanding services. So as I said, I only support API AI at the moment, but I definitely want to add support for Lex and Lewis and Wit and some of the other services like that. I'm really keen to add more connectors at the moment. So at the moment, I primarily use it through Slack, although there is a Facebook Messenger and a Twitter and a Telegram client, a connector for it. But obviously there's loads of other chat services that can be hooked up. So all those modules definitely are going to come in at some point. In terms of storing context and state, you can put stuff into MongoDB or Redis at the moment, but there's no reason why it couldn't go into a MySQL database or whatever you like. So there's definitely scope for adding database modules, and then kind of just fleshing out the skills and giving way more kind of out of the box default skills that people can install. That would definitely be really nice. And all those kind of things are things that I've kind of got planned, but I would really like to kind of build a community around and get people contributing things that they like. I particularly like certain chat clients and I particularly like certain databases, so I want to focus my development effort on those. But if other people have got other preferences, I want them to be able to just come along, write their own Python class, and it will just allow opsdroid to then interface with those other services. The other main thing that I'm really interested in thinking about more is this whole idea of context and how you handle dialogues between bots and users, because a lot of the kind of chat services you see around either don't handle context very well. Things are very one-shot questions, and it's nice to see kind of things like Alexa getting better at that. I had Alexa ask me a question the other day in a dialogue, which I thought was quite interesting. But quite often you're just giving it a single command. Alexa, I want you to play the Beatles on Spotify or whatever it is. But in terms of actually maintaining a conversation, some of the other frameworks I've seen seem to be implementing things as like a flow chart almost. It's a tree. It's like the user will say this, and then the bot will say this, and then the user will say one of these four things. And, it's almost like a big nested if statement or something. And that's great. That does seem to work quite well. But there's all sorts of issues around if the bot gets something wrong, you're then kind of stuck in this dialogue chain. Or if the user just wants to change the conversation and ask it to do something else, you can end up stuck in little loops and little feedback cycles and things. So I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about how to kind of weight different bits of context and kind of treat the conversation as more of maybe like a graph or just kind of a place where you're jumping around all over the place. And adding those kind of capabilities into opsdroid, maybe allowing you to mark up a skill as instead of saying match this sentence, you can say, match this sentence as long as the context is this. And that context might be the bot has just asked you a question, or, I've just been asking the bot about a specific thing, and so you can assume that I'm still talking about that thing. So it's all stuff that's kind of lined up on the roadmap, but I just haven't got to yet.
Yeah, and what you're saying too about the decision structures for being able to create a more interactive dialogue with the bot brings up the idea of discoverability of the potential responses or requests that you can make. Because as you mentioned, when you're in a terminal environment, you can use tab completion to see, okay, this is the list of options to this particular command. But if you're in a chat interface, then you have to rely on using, explicit help commands and then having it post a big list of capabilities. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts there as far as how to make the discoverability a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky problem because there's a few different options that kind of immediately spring to mind around. You could start, especially in chat, it's easier. You could start a conversation where the bot gives you some examples of things you can ask it when you first speak to it, or maybe you put in some kind of help thing where you can say, what can you do, and then it might give you a few examples of other things that it can do. The other thing you could possibly do is when you ask the bot to do something, it can do it and respond, but then also maybe give you a suggestion and say, why don't you try asking me this? Why don't you try asking me that? But that can get a bit frustrating and a bit annoying if you're just trying to get things done. You don't want the bot constantly kind of spraying kind of help manual type stuff at you. So it's definitely not a problem that I've managed to solve in my head yet. It's something I'm still thinking about, but maybe it might be useful to have some kind of web app or something like that goes hand in hand with opsdroid that allows you to just have a look through what is available or what's enabled and maybe just give you some suggestions that way.
So are there any other topics that you think we should discuss before we start to close out the show?
So I guess the only other thing that I was quite interested in talking about was kind of building a community around open source project. So, we've talked a few times in this about Home Assistant, and I think Home Assistant is a really kind of inspiring project to look at. They've got a fantastic community, loads of active contributors, active forums, people writing additional libraries and things. And that's kind of the thing I've got in the back of my mind about getting opsdroid into that kind of place where there's people writing third-party modules for it, people contributing to the core project, and I'm hopeful that other people will find the project as useful as I do and start getting involved. But I'm in the process at the moment of trying to think of different ways of kind of promoting the project and getting people to get on board. So I kind of just wanted to say, if anybody's listening, please come and contribute to opsdroid and get involved and get stuck in. Definitely interested in kind of incentivizing that. So I might look into something like giving away stickers to people that actively contribute to the project or something along those lines, and just to try and kind of create a friendly community around the project.
And just the perennial reminder to people listening that contribution doesn't necessarily equal code. There are lots of ways that you can contribute to any open source project, whether it be through writing software or triaging bugs or helping with documentation or just providing feedback about how you're using the project so that the project authors and maintainers can have real-world examples of the specific needs that people have for the project.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I personally find when I'm working with different projects and I want to install something or use something for the first time, I'll Google for kind of a tutorial or a getting started guide, and you end up finding loads of them. And quite often I'll click through the first few and maybe the language style isn't quite how I like to read things, or maybe they're not diving into the right things, and I'll just keep going through different blog posts until I find one that kind of suits what I'm doing, and then have a look through that. So I definitely encourage people to just write about your use of opsdroid and how you installed it and what you're doing with it. I'd be really, really excited to see things like that.
All right. And so for anybody who wants to get in touch with you, follow the work that you're doing, see the state of the opsdroid project, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes.
Okay, excellent.
And so with that, I'll move us into the picks. And so my pick today is a podcast I just started listening to. It looks like it's fairly early in its history, and it's called the Rough Translation Podcast from NPR. And so what they do is they take different sort of discussion topics from from current events and talk about how those same kinds of ideas are being discussed or dealt with in other contexts and cultures, just so to try and bring us out of our echo chamber and see what the state of the world is in other areas that are outside of our immediate purview. So I thought that was kind of an interesting goal with a podcast, and the first episode so far was pretty interesting. And with that, I'll pass it to you. Do you have any picks for us, Jacob?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I was going to pick a podcast as well. So we talked a lot in this podcast about Home Assistant, and it's about a month or so ago now, they started creating a Home Assistant podcast, and they're about 4 or 5 episodes in now, and it's really interesting just hearing people talk about how they've set up Home Assistant, how they've installed different home automation hardware, and how they've linked that together with Home Assistant. It's really great for giving you ideas about what you can do in your own home, and then they also interview the core maintainers of the project and hear about what's coming up in the roadmap and things like that. So if you're kind of into home automation and into the Home Assistant project, the podcast is excellent.
All right. So with that, I would like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me and tell everybody more about the work you're doing with opsdroid and ChatOps. It's definitely an interesting subject area and one that I've been keeping an eye out for potential frameworks that I can use to implement ChatOps in my own work, and opsdroid is one of the more promising candidates. So I appreciate your work on that, and I appreciate your time. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for inviting me on. Enjoy your day too.